Mayapur. Hare Krishna. Oh, Guranga. Shiguru Nitai Gaur Premanandi Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Jaya Gopi Janna Vallabha Jaya Giri Varadari Jaya Giri Varadari Jaya Gopi Janna Vallabha Jaya Giri Varadari Jaya Giri Yashodanandana Jaya Braja Janarandana Jaya Braja Janarandana Yashodanandana Jaya Braja Janarandana Jaya Hari Jaya Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama Rama Narayanam Namaskrityam Naram Charanurottamam Devyam Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Viraya Vede Ramayanishchaiva Purane Bharate Tata Adavande Chamadhe Chahari Sarati Giyate Mukam Karoti Vachalam Bangum Gayate Girim Yat Kripa Tamaham Vande Shri Guru Dinatarana Paramananda Madhava Paramananda He Madhava Kadunda Luchi Makaranda Se Makaranda Panakori Anande Boro Hari Hari Harinka Name Vandavela, Hari Koribe Chakadola, Se Chakadolanka Haraye, Manamo Rahu Niramtare, Manamo Niramtare Rahu, Ha Krishna, Muli Jiva Jao. Ha Krishna Boli Jao Jiva Motu Radha Radha Dava Motu Radha Radha Dava Motu Radha Radha Dava. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. 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 Good morning from Sridhar Mayapur, dear devotees. So we're reading from Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam, the king of all literatures. This is Canto 3, Chapter 29, the description of devotional service by Lord Kapila Dev. And we've finally gone on to text number 10, after spending 5 sessions on text number 9. Karma nirharam udishya parasmin va tad arpanam yajed yastavyam iti va pritik bhava susatvika. When a devotee worships the Supreme Personality of Godhead and offers the results of his activities in order to free himself from the inebrities, the fruitive activities, his devotion is in the mode of goodness. Very interesting. Interesting word here, pitak bhava, which was used in the last verse, in which in the purport Srila Prabhupada said that pitak bhava is a synonym of that meaning separate, meaning to be a separatist. Prabhupada writes in his purport, the Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Sudras, along with the Brahmacharis, Grihastas, Vanaprasthas, and Sannyasis, are the members of the 8 divisions of Varnas and Ashrams, and they have their respective duties to perform for the satisfaction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. When such activities are performed and the results are offered to the Supreme Lord, they are called karma arpanam, duties performed for the satisfaction of the Lord. If there's any inebriety or fault, it is atoned for by this offering process. But if this offering process is in the mode of goodness, rather than in pure devotion, then the interest is different. The 4 ashrams and the 4 varnas act for some benefit in accordance with their personal interests. Therefore, such activities are in the mode of goodness. They cannot be counted in the category of pure devotion. Pure devotional service, as described by Rupa Goswami, is free from all material desires. Anya vilasita sunyam. There can be no excuse for personal or material interest. Devotional activities should be transcendental to fruitive activities and empiric philosophical speculation. Pure devotional service is transcendental to all material qualities. Devotional service in the modes of ignorance, passion, and goodness can be divided into 81 categories. There are different devotional activities such as hearing, chanting, remembering, worshiping, offering, prayer, rendering service, and surrendering everything. And each of them can be divided, again, in 3 qualitative categories. So that was Navavidi Bhakti, the 9 processes of Bhakti. And that Navavidi Bhakti can again be divided each into 3 different categories. There is hearing in the mode of goodness, in the mode of passion, in the mode of ignorance and in the mode of goodness. Similarly, there's chanting in the mode of ignorance, passion and goodness, etc. 3 multiplied by 9 equals 27. And when again multiplied by 3, it becomes 81. One has to transcend all such mixed materialistic devotional service in order to reach the standard of pure devotional service as explained in the next verses. Gora graganya gana gota goloruharam Goranga gudatama gopyata kolpa briksham Gopalagada ratidam yati singha gora Govinda deshi kavaram satatam namami Vanchakalpatarubhischa Kripa sindhu bhyaeva Patitanam pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo namo namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So today we're going to have a little bit of a technical discussion. We want to speak about how bhakti in the mode of goodness is still mundane. It's a very subtle topic, and we're going to use some technical terms from our acharyas. I hope the devotees don't become discouraged or frightened by those technical terms. We could compare it to learning music. And did you know that some of the most famous contemporary musicians of our era, such as all 4 of the Beatles, such as Eric Clapton, who's considered by some to be the greatest guitar player, or Jimi Hendrix, or Eddie Van Halen, none of them knew how to read music, but they were natural musicians. So similarly, bhakti is svabhavika, it's natural. It's a natural thing to be performed. But this is music can be performed by someone in a natural way, and someone may be a great genius in music and not be able to read music. But at the same time, if we want to study music, to learn to read music notes, notation, it's helpful to understand different musical terms and things. So I don't want to scare anybody away with these technical terms. They're not necessary to become a pure devotee, to learn to practice pure bhakti, but it's helpful for us. So Prabhupada begins his purport by speaking about varnashram dharma. And it's very interesting. He says that when these results of varnashram dharma are offered to the Lord, they're karmarpanam. They're not bhakti, they're karma. And he says, but if they're done for the satisfaction of the Lord, that's karmarpana. He says, but if this offering process is in the mode of goodness, rather than in pure devotion, then the interest is different. So this word in the verse today, pritag bhava, these 2 words, which Prabhupada translates as separatist, are significant. Although someone is practicing bhakti in goodness, it's still considered to be saguna bhakti. There's another technical term. Guna means the modes of material nature. Saguna means with the modes of material nature. So the next verses we'll be hearing from in this chapter will be speaking about nirguna bhakti, or bhakti that's just free from the modes of material nature. So in his purport to text 8 of this chapter, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur quoted some verses from the Brihan Naradiya Purana, which describe bhakti in a mode of ignorance. There's 3 verses, Adama, Tamasak Bhakta, someone who's in the mode of ignorance, the lowest, and then a Madhyam Bhakta in the mode of ignorance, and an Uttam Bhakta in the mode of ignorance. And then we also spoke something about the 3 categories in the mode of passion. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur only quotes the verses about bhakti in the mode of ignorance, but he says there that if one looks in the Brihadaranyaka Purana, there's also verses describing bhakti in the mode of passion and bhakti in the mode of goodness. So in this chapter, first canto, chapter 15 of the Brihadaranyaka Purana, text 146 to 148, it describes bhakti in the mode of goodness. And there's three different bhaktas according to this. This is a description given by Yamaraj to King Bhagirathi, who brought the Ganga down to this world. And in text 146, he describes what is the Adama Sattvika Bhakta, or the lowest amongst the devotees in the mode of goodness. Yastu Sakritta Papanam Shayartam Prarchayadvarim Shradaya Pariyopeta Sa Satvikya Dhamma Smita. Someone who's worshiping the Lord to destroy their sins they've committed, but they have faith in the Lord. That devotee is the lowest among the Sattvika Bhaktas. So we see sometimes people, they have some faith in the Lord, but their faith is mixed with modes of material nature. And as described in this verse, Pritag Bhava, they have some separate desire from the Lord. And that desire is that they want to destroy their sins. They may think, as Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur comments on the 11th verse of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, they may think that bhakti is dependent upon becoming free from my sins. If I don't become free from sins, then I can't practice bhakti. But bhakti is surat. Bhakti is independent. It's not dependent upon even becoming free from sin. So someone who's performing bhakti for the purpose, the selfish purpose, a good purpose though, a mode of goodness purpose, to destroy their sins, and they have faith in the Lord, that bhakti is considered to be Adama Sattvika Bhakti. There are Adama Sattvika Bhakta, a devotee who's the lowest amongst the devotees in the mode of goodness. Now at this point, a question may arise in someone's mind, perhaps in the mind of Krishna Kund, because there's a verse that we both very much like, which is spoken by Prahlad Maharaj to Lord Nrsingadev. It's in the 7th canto of the Bhagavatam. He says, if dashyasi me kaman, dashyasi, if you want to give me kaman, something desirable, vadams tvam vadadarshaba. One of the Lord's names is Varadarshaba. There's a deity known as Lord Vardaraj in South India. My dear Lord, you're the best of the givers of benediction. If you want to give a benediction to me, then I pray, kamanam hridyasamroham, that in my hrid, in my heart, there be no material desires. So does this mean that Prahlad Maharaj is an Adama Sattvika Bhakta, or a devotee, the lowest category of devotees in the mode of goodness? We should look to Srila Prabhupada's purport of this verse, this prayer to look to Lord Nrsingadev from Prahlad. This is from 7th canto, 10th chapter, text 7. It's a very important verse, which is quoted many times by our acharyas. Prabhupada writes in his purport, Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu taught us how to pray for benedictions from the Lord. He said, Nadanam na janam na sundarim kavitam va jagadisha kamaye mama janmani janmanishvare bhavatad bhaktir ahoitaki twayi. Oh my Lord, I don't want any wealth, followers, beautiful wife from you. These are all materialistic desires. If I ask you for any benediction, I pray that in whatever forms of life I may take my birth under any circumstances, I will not be bereft of your transcendental devotional service. So this prayer by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, quoted by Prabhupada in his purport here, Nadanam Najanam Sundaram, this is describing Nirguna Bhakti, or bhakti which is beyond the modes of material nature. And even he's praying, Mama Janmani Janmanishwari, I don't care if I get liberation or not, which is a motivation described in this verse today by the Sattvika Bhakta. I want to get liberation. But Mahaprabhu was saying, I don't even want liberation. Srila Prabhupada goes on in this purport from 7th canto. Devotees are always on the positive platform in contrast to the Mayavadis who want to make everything impersonal or void. What does it mean they're on the positive platform? Does it mean they have a good attitude and they're chipper about everything and they're not depressed? English is a funny thing. I see Prabhupada's meaning here on the positive platform, meaning they're doing something positive instead of just nothing, which is the motivation or the activity of the Mayavadis. We just do nothing. Rather, the devotees are practicing bhakti. Prabhupada goes on, one cannot remain void, sunyavadi. Rather, one must possess something. Therefore, the devotee on the positive side wants to possess something, and this possession is very nicely described by Prahlad Maharaj, who says, quote, if I must take some benediction from you, I pray that within the core of my heart there may be no material desires. The desire to serve the Supreme Personality of Godhead is not at all material. So that's another way to say it's not saguna bhakti. It's not bhakti in the modes of material nature. And it's significant here, Prabhupada's paraphrasing Prahlad Maharaj's statement, if I must take some benediction from you, the Lord is saying, you take some benediction from me. And Prahlad's not asking for a benediction. The Lord is offering him some benediction. So then Prahlad says, if I must take some benediction from you, then I pray that within the core of my heart, there be no material desires. This shouldn't be confused with Adama Sattvika Bhakti. That Adama Sattvika Bhakti is described by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur in one lecture he gave at Radhakund, where he said that our goal is not anartha nibriti. Our goal is not to purify our hearts. Rather, our goal is artha prabriti. We want some positive thing. Our desire is to please the Lord. So in this verse, Prahlad Maharaj is not the same as a Adama Sattvika Bhakta, who is praying for something for themselves, because at Adama Sattvika Bhakta, again, these are technical terms, but it may be helpful for us, there is pritag bhava. He has some separate desire from the Lord. And that Adama Sattvika Bhakta, his desire is that he wants to become free from material desires. And he's wanting that for himself. Because these material desires cause me so much suffering. And because I can't become a good devotee unless I have these desires. But his desire to be a good devotee is his own desire. It's not for the pleasure of the Lord. Whereas Prahlad Maharaj in this verse, Yadi Dasyasi Me Kaman, there's a subtle difference. And subtlety is very important for Vaishnavas to understand. His subtle difference, he's also praying for freedom from material desires, but he's saying, it's not really for me. You're insisting that I take a benediction. So if you want to give me a benediction out of his humility, he's saying, I have these material desires which will impede my bhakti. I won't be able to understand you. So you please, I won't be able to understand your desire. So you please remove these material desires from my heart. So the Adama Sattvika Bhakta is not the same as Prahlad Maharaj. Then there's the Madhyama Sattvika Bhakta. It's a lot of technical terms. Just fasten your safety belt. You'll survive. Okay? He's described in the Brihan Naradiya Purana. Hare ridham priyamiti sushu samkurute tuya. Shraddhaya samyuta bhuya sattviki madhyama tusa. The Madhyama Bhakta is thinking, Haridam priyamati, that this is pleasing to the Lord. And so with that idea in the mind, he serves the Lord, and he also, Shraddhaya samyuto, he also has bhakti, he also has faith. That person is a sattviki madhyama. He's a madhyam sattvika bhakta. A devotee in the mode of goodness is a middle category of these three devotees in the mode of goodness. So this may sound confusing. How is this something which is saguna bhakti or material bhakti? Because he's thinking of the pleasure of the Lord. But let's consider this carefully. Sometimes someone wants something from you. Sometimes maybe there may be a con artist who wants to steal some money from an old lady or wants to try to take away her house or something after her husband has died. And so he makes friends with her. And he reads about her in the newspaper. Maybe he talks to some of her friends to find out what kind of things she likes to do. So he's thinking about her interest. That's in the mode of goodness, when you think about the interests of another person. But if it's pritag bhava, your motive is separate from the Lord. This is very subtle. It's become even more subtle than previous. If you have a subtle desire, you want to know what is the desire of Gurudev, what is the desire of the Lord, but your purpose in wanting to know the desire of Gurudev is for your own self, so that you can be a good devotee for yourself. It's not wholly and solely for the pleasure of Gurudev, or wholly and solely for the pleasure of the Lord. That's a good devotee. It's a very special devotee who's trying to understand the pleasure of Guru, the pleasure of the Lord. But he's a madhyam sattvika bhakta, and still his bhakti is saguna. It's within the modes of material nature. Then there's the third category of sattvika bhakta. I hope nobody dies from this description, this discussion, so technical. He's described in the Brihanaradiya Purana in text number 148. Vidi budyat chayad yastu dasava chipritam nipa bhaktinam pravara satu utama satviki smita. Someone who worships the Lord with this mood, I'm a das, I'm a servant of the Lord, I'm a slave. Das also means a slave. And he's doing that with some knowledge of Shastra. Buddhi buddhyat chayet. He's understanding proper vidhi, proper Shastra. And he's worshiping the Lord for that purpose. That bhakti is considered to be the most excellent of sattviki bhaktas. So he's doing it, his motivation is according to Shastra. And he's becoming a servant of the Lord. And he's surrendering to him. But still, there's a little something there. There's a little something there. It's not totally pure. Because still, he's a pritag bhava. He's doing this for himself, for his own purpose. Jiva Goswami speaks about this Bhagavatam verse we're studying today in his Krama Sandarbha commentary. And he says that the desire for liberation is in the mode of goodness. A person who is aiming for liberation, who he calls karma nirharam, he offers his actions to the Lord. He worships the Lord, thinking that such worship is necessary as a daily rule for everyone. He's not focused on bhakti. And so this is covering bhakti. As Srila Prabhupada described in his purport to this verse we're studying today, 10th verse of the 29th chapter, he speaks about Varnashram Dharma. And he says there's certain people who think that following this Varnashram Dharma and doing karmarpana, offering it to the Lord, that's bhakti. But Prabhupada says this offering process is in the mode of goodness rather than pure devotion. If it's in the mode of goodness, then the interest is different. Or if the interest is different from the Lord, but still you're doing that, that's in the mode of goodness. Jiva Goswami says they're doing it not with the knowledge of the goal of bhakti, but they're using bhakti. Or maybe Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur in his commentary on Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu on the Anyabhilasi Tashunya verse, which Prabhupada quotes here, he says that there's two ways that that this Jnana Karmadi Anabritam, it's all technical, I'm very sorry. Hope nobody dies today. The Rupa Goswami says Anabritam, it shouldn't cover bhakti. There's two ways it may cover bhakti. One is that you may think it's the goal. Varnashram Dharma is the goal, and I'm practicing bhakti, I'm chanting Hare Krishna so that I understand who I am in Varnashram Dharma, and I can become a very good wife. I can become a good husband, I can become a good Brahmin, or whatever. That's covering bhakti. Or you may be practicing bhakti because you think if I don't practice, you may be practicing Varnashram Dharma thinking that if I don't practice Varnashram Dharma, then I can't practice bhakti. Unless I'm situated in Varnashram Dharma, I can't really chant 16 rounds. I can't really chant the name purely. I have to be situated in Varnashram Dharma. So that's covering bhakti. It's sattvika bhakti. It's a type of bhakti, but it's a saguna bhakti. It's bhakti in the mode of material nature, because he's desiring something other than the Lord. He's thinking that liberation is the goal. That's a devotee in the mode of goodness. So the 11th canto, 25th chapter, describes the nature of a sattvika bhakta in his activities. Sattvika karako sangi ragando rajasa smita tamasa smiti vibrasto nirguna mad apashraya. So this word nirguna is used. Again, this is saguna bhakti and nirguna bhakti, two technical terms. Not so important, again, to learn all these technical terms, just like you don't have to learn to read music to be a great musician, but it may help us. It gives us some framework. So a performer of action who's free from attachment, that person, he's sattvika karako sangi, his karaka, his activities are free from attachment. He's in the mode of goodness. Someone who's performing action with sense objects is in the mode of passion. And someone who's doing action devoid of inquiry, doesn't know why he's doing it, he's just doing it, is in the mode of ignorance. Sometimes we see devotees too. So Prabhu, why do you do this? I don't know. That's what they told me. I'm just supposed to do it. That's bhakti in the mode of ignorance. Because you don't know, you're ignorant. You don't know why I'm doing it. You're just doing it because everybody else does it. He says someone who's taking shelter of Krishna alone, Krishna's telling us to Uddhava, that person is the only person who's beyond the gunas. And then he speaks about knowledge. First he speaks about action, then knowledge, and then happiness in the three modes. So knowledge in the three modes, kaivalyam satvikam jnana rajo vaikalpikam chayat prakritim tamasam jnanam manishtam nirgunam smitam. When someone has knowledge concerning that the jiva is separate from the body, that's in the mode of goodness. That's an important thing to know. Knowledge with various options of doubt. I'm not really sure about this. Maybe I'll do this. Maybe I'll do that. It's in the mode of passion. Knowledge of material life is in the mode of ignorance. There's a lot of people who like knowledge of material life. But Krishna says, Jnanamannishtam nirgunam smitam. Knowledge concerning me is understood to be beyond the gunas. And then happiness, satikam sukam, atmotam vishayotam tu rajasam tamasam moha, dainyotam nirgunam mad apashrayam. Happiness that arises from knowledge of the soul, that's in the mode of goodness. Happiness that arises from sense objects is in the mode of passion, and happiness arising from illusion and degradation is in the mode of ignorance. He says, but happiness arising from activities related to me is beyond the gunas. So in each of these cases, the sadhana and the goal are in the gunas. Both the activity we perform and the goal of the activity is subtly or grossly within the modes of material nature. And therefore, it's not going to please Krishna completely. I think what I would like to do is stop here. We're a couple of minutes later than we'd like to go. We spoke a lot, and I think we'll continue on this verse tomorrow. It's a very, very subtle discussion, and we can go deeper into this with the devotees. Bless us. It's a very important subject to try to understand these things. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, I'll just finish with this comment, that he says that if someone is doing bhakti in the mode of goodness, then he says through Rajarsik and Tamasic bhakti, he says although they produce results, the performers generally get material results. But the results will be greater than usual because they're doing bhakti. But even if someone is performing bhakti in the mode of goodness, the result may be something mundane. It may be they become free from material desires. Or as Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur describes in Madhurya Kadambini, there's even an anartha something unwanted in the heart, which comes from bhakti in the mode of goodness. And that is that someone will enjoy bhakti in a subtle way. They may get some fame and prestige, some wealth and things which come from bhakti. And someone thinks this is the goal. So this is the comment from Jiva Goswami that in this case, both the sadhana, the activity we're doing, and the goal are under the modes of material nature. So my humble apologies if anybody died during this lecture. I hope that you all survived. Hare Krishna, Mother Shraddha, nice to see you here. Huh? And Lynn has a comment. Lynn, you're very thoughtful. It seems as if understanding these subtleties and intentions are what allows us to pull out the weeds of material desires, not just by the plant, but by the roots. Perhaps this then allows us to plant the seeds of true devotion. Very thoughtful comment. Thank you so much. What are we doing? I am not such a personality who can give bhakti. I don't see myself like that by our discussion. Such a person is as a nirag vakta, in the language of Jiva Goswami and Bhakti Sandarbha, a speaker without material desires. I don't consider myself like that. But if we repeat what we've heard from Guru, that's helpful. But if we repeat what we've heard from Guru and we think about it, and we get other people to think about it. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, in his commentary in the 12th chapter of the Gita, he says this is very helpful. It takes us further in bhakti. So I'm very pleased to see that you're thinking about this. So yes, if we think about these subtleties and intentions, it's important to think about subtleties and intentions. Ask any wife who gets frustrated by her husband. And can't you just understand what I'm saying? Men sometimes are very gross, but not only men, sometimes women are also gross. And they can't understand the subtle intention of the man. And my Guru Maharaj used to say that misunderstanding is poison. So in any relationship, it's very important, if we want to go deep in that relationship, if we want to have pure love for that other person, we need to understand the subtleties in the intentions. As you're pointing out. So understanding those subtleties in our intentions of bhakti, they allow us to see what's not bhakti. She's saying then that perhaps then this allows us to plant the seeds of true devotion. It may allow, bhakti may be planted at that time, but more likely bhakti may have already been planted in the form of getting the holy name from sadhu guru. But the problem is that we're going out to water our garden and we have no idea what the different plants are. In Jagannath Puri, we have a huge amount of darba grass growing around, which is auspicious and used for puja. But in the West, they call it Bermuda grass. You know what Bermuda grass is? You must have it. And Bermuda grass is very, very difficult. If you get Bermuda grass even in your pot, you practically have to take all the soil out because the roots go so deep and they go very quickly. And if you just break off the top, the plant will keep growing and it'll just take over the whole, if you have it in a planter, it'll take over the whole pot and kill whatever plant you have there. So if you think, oh, this is really sweet looking grass, let me water this also, that's a problem. So the first thing is we have to understand what are the weeds and what is the actual bhakti lata bij, or the seed of bhakti. That's very important. And so Lord Kapila Dev is describing this to us in this 29th chapter of the 3rd canto. I was speaking with Niranjan Maharaj yesterday about our classes, and I told him that for so long I've been speaking a lot about the 10th canto of the Bhagavatam, and many devotees like that. But I told him I don't want to have devotees think that I'm only speaking in the 10th canto, because the beginning, middle, and end of the Bhagavatam, it's all nectar. And so I was inspired to study more deeply by giving these classes, the 29th chapter especially of this 3rd canto of the Bhagavatam, which describes these subtleties in different types of bhakti, which is very healthy for me. And I hope that it's also healthy and useful for other devotees and for Srila Prabhupada's mission. So, does anybody else have any reflections or comments? Sachitanai Prabhu, do you want to come here and speak in the mic?
Thank you, Prabhu. There was something you mentioned almost at the end of your class that caught my attention, and it was the happiness in the mode of goodness and happiness in relation to Krishna beyond. It goes beyond. And also there's then right now you just finished saying that there's these subtleties in motivation. It reminds me one time some devotees were having a wonderful conversation about how wonderful was Harinam. Harinam was so great. Harinam is like great. And Prabhupada overheard this. And he chastised them. He says, Harinam is not for your pleasure. It's for the pleasure of Krishna. So then I got, wow. So that explanation you were giving, because with the general tendency is like, I'm doing the Yagya, the Sankirtan. Kali Yuga is the holy name. And he said, what's wrong with that? To have happiness. But even that, if it's not totally for the pleasure of Krishna, it's tinged. You can expand if you want.
Wow, what a great comment. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Yes, we can. Man, that kirtan was rocking. Man, I like when Madhav Prabhu does kirtan, or this person or that person. Nothing against Madhav Prabhu, he's my dear friend. I love his kirtan. But if we're liking someone's kirtan because I really get into it, it really gives me pleasure, that's bhakti in the mode of goodness. You're doing something for which is an aspect of bhakti, but because you're pritak bhava, you have some separate desire from the Lord, then it's not completely pure. Now, it's interesting to me that Srila Prabhupada didn't discourage this bhakti in the mode of goodness. Rather, he encouraged it. And he kept, in the early days, they had a famous jar of gulabjamins by the door. And some devotees we heard, they were thinking, I can't do this anymore. I can't practice bhakti anymore. I'm going to go back to material life. So they were leaving the ashram that just before I go, I'll take one more gulabjaman. And they would take that gulabjaman. And the gulabjaman was so good that maybe I should stay for a little bit longer. I won't find gulabjamans like this outside. So that was some pleasure for their own self. It's in a mode of goodness. And to encourage our movement to keep devotees going, Prabhupada sometimes encouraged that. But we should understand in a deep way the difference between saguna bhakti and nirguna bhakti. Bhakti in the mode of goodness, which has some qualities of the modes of material nature, and bhakti without the modes of material nature. Srila Prabhupada wanted devotees to speak about Varnashram, wanted devotees to practice Varnashram Dharma. But we have to be careful in our motivation for that. If we're doing that because this will please Srila Prabhupada, because Prabhupada wanted that, if we're doing that because for the pleasure of the Lord and Srila Prabhupada, understanding I have material desires, but not, my purpose is not for my material desires, my purpose is to please Srila Prabhupada. And if I leave, that may cause some disturbance in the society that will be displeasing to Srila Prabhupada. So let me practice Varnashram Dharma in that way. That's nice. That's really good. That can be nirguna bhakti, bhakti without the modes of material nature. But if someone is practicing it because they have a lower quality of faith, and they think, I have to do this. If I don't do this, I can't practice bhakti, or because they think this is a goal, then that's saguna bhakti. A very subtle discussion. It was a great example, Sachitananda Prabhu. Thank you so much. Anapani, do you have any famous comments? Here's one of Anapani Radha's famous comments.
Hare Krishna, thank you so much for explaining these weeds which we have to see to grow Bhakti Lata, but not these weeds. And thank you so much, Sachidananda Prabhu, for this really nice example how Prabhupada chastised devotees for trying to enjoy this Harinam. It's really great. But I just would like to request you to show these weeds more elaborately, because I just heard these 3 types. I even wrote this, but I cannot really see it. So to recognize it in my life, can you just maybe give some examples for each of it? You gave something, like you explained this disciple, he behaves in such and such way. Yeah, just maybe in a simple way, just to see it more is clearly. Sorry.
Okay. I'm trying to think if there's any examples of persons like this, and no examples are coming to my mind. Persons. Yeah, Sachitananda Prabhu, come here.
Ruas, as you were speaking from the beginning of this, something came in my mind from the Chaitanya Charitamrita. And I was just thinking that every devotee who will read the conversation of Ramananda Roy and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, like when he asked, what is the goal of life? But in a nutshell, whatever you were describing, at least in my opinion, I was thinking, yeah, this fits perfectly because he gave the basis. And then if you read the purport and the explanation, you say, well, yeah. And then he goes, go on, there's more. And then this one, I think this is right. Yes, that's perfect, but go on. And then go on. If you know something else, tell me more, and tell me more, and tell me more. So this is very technical, what you were saying, which is nice also. But also in that is a comparison that you can read and you can say, yeah, what Madhavananda was speaking is just that. Yeah, but explain that. I'm sorry if I took it away.
Yeah, in fact, I'm thinking in our next session or sessions on this verse to speak something from that 8th chapter of the Madhya Lila about Ramananda Samvad, because it's the same topic. And sometimes devotees get confused with that chapter because even it says Sarva Dharma Parityagya, that you should give up, you go beyond surrender. Mahaprabhu keeps saying, Eho Bhaya, Agi Kahar, this is secondary, can you say something more? But she was asking for examples. So I can describe these persons. Examples don't come to my mind. Maybe somebody else here in the room or somebody online will think of some example. I don't like to think of, there's probably contemporary devotees that I could think of like this, but we don't like to use such persons as examples. We want to think of something in Shastra, because the problem with applying this and being to a contemporary devotee is that I'm making myself their judge. And it's not appropriate. Rather, if I see something to Shastra and Shastra and Acharya say this is an example, then they're saying that. They're the judge. I'm not the judge. So I So someone who's worshiping the Lord to destroy their sins. I've seen different devotees like this. We've all seen Sachitananda Prabhu and I. We were in the Brahmacharya ashram for a long time in LA. We saw a lot of devotees who really had to work on becoming free from material desires, and that was their motivation. They were practicing bhakti. That's in the mode of goodness. They're practicing bhakti. They have faith in the Lord, but their faith is the lowest. Their bhakti is the lowest amongst the Sattvika bhaktas. Does that make sense? Okay, we got the first one. And the subtle difference between that and Prahlad Maharaj's prayer, I think you got that. So then the Madhyam Sattvika bhakta is someone who is thinking this is pleasing to the Lord. And this is even more subtle. This is the difficulty of these things. They're making a little advancement in bhakti, and they're thinking that I'll make more advancement, I'll become advanced. So, Pritak Bhava, they have a separate desire. Their desire is their own advancement. And that's in the mode of goodness. That's a very good thing. But still, it's for their own personal benefit. So these are Madhyam Bhakta who thinks about the pleasure of the Lord. They understand that if I understand the pleasure of the Lord, then I'll become more advanced. But he's not surrendering to it. He or she is not surrendering to that desire. They're not becoming one with that desire, with everything in their life. They're still Pritak Bhava. When we analyze these three different types of Sattvika Bhaktas, the Adam, the Madhyam, and the Uttam, apply this phrase, Pritak Bhava, each time, and that'll help you to understand. There's some separate desire. Each one of these has some separate desire, and therefore it's Saguna Bhakti. It's Bhakti in the mode of material nature. So that's the Madhyam Bhakta. Is that clear? Not really clear. Okay, so the Madhyam Sattvika Bhakta is someone who has a little more purified intelligence, and they can understand that the Lord has some desires. Someone who's really low class, they can't even understand that somebody else has a desire. We give the example sometimes, a lusty man just sees a woman, and he doesn't think she likes to play chess. He doesn't think she likes to go for cruises or this or that. He just thinks, wow, she's hot. And he's just seeing the body. He doesn't understand she has desires at all. That's relationship in the mode of ignorance. But when someone wants to please that person, they want to please them, but they're pleasing them is for their own benefit. It's not that I want to please you for your pleasure. There's some mixed motivation in it. And I gave the example that someone tries to understand what is your pleasure, what you like, because they want to get something from you. They want to get money from you or this or that, something. So that's a madhyam. In bhakti, when someone begins to understand the mood of the Lord, that's a very high thing. It's incredibly high. But it's still saguna bhakti if they're pritag bhava, if their motivation is something separate from the Lord. Okay? You got that one? Okay, that's the madhyam. Then there's the uttam sattvika bhakta. And he's someone who surrenders to the Lord to some extent. That person becomes a servant of the Lord, understanding this is what Shastra says. They're inspired by Shastra in that way. But still, they're pritag bhav. They have some separate motivation. What is their separate motivation? It doesn't describe here, but their separate motivation may be to get liberation. So they're serving the Lord. They're doing something even more than the Madhyam Bhakta. The Madhyam Bhakta, he tries to understand what is the Madhyam Sattvik Bhakta, tries to understand what is pleasing to the Lord. The Uttam Sattvik Bhakta takes it a step further, and he surrenders to the Lord. He wants to become a servant of the Lord, but his surrender is not complete. It's not. It's still saguna bhakti because he's pritag bhava, using his technical phrases. He's pritag bhava. He has some separate motivation from the Lord, which is even more subtle. So these things are very, very difficult to understand because they're very, very subtle. Just like someone who is growing plants. You know, when your seed starts sprouting up, it can be very difficult to understand what is a weed and what is the seed that you want to plant. And if you can't tell the difference between the two and you don't watch it carefully, all of a sudden you may have a huge weed there, and the plant that you wanted to nourish is dead. So it's important that devotees develop this subtlety, and therefore this Madhya Lila chapter 8 is there, Ramananda Samvad. And again, we're not speaking this to beat anyone up. We're not speaking this to intimidate anyone or to destroy anyone. Devotees, we should accept this for our benefit. Our motivation is that, and this is what Srila Prabhupada is giving these commentaries on Lord Kapilati's teachings. So Prabhupada's disciple, Ramana Sukha Prabhu, has made a very nice comment. Prabhupada advocated for devotees to establish Varnashram colleges where devotees can be trained in their various Varna duties. All devotees are beyond these designations, yet at the same time, Prabhupada wanted Varnashram designations to be taught. Can you clarify this apparent contradiction? Is there a Varnashram college in ISKCON? Interesting question, the last one. The first question, as far as I can see from studying those conversations with Srila Prabhupada, one time the devotee said, but Prabhupada, we're beyond Varnashram because we're chanting Hare Krishna. And Prabhupada chastised him and said, no, you're not beyond Varnashram. Why is so many devotees falling down? I'm paraphrasing. He said something to that effect. So Prabhupada wanted devotees to be trained. He saw devotees, these Varnashram designations, these upadhis, can be helpful. But Prabhupada also gave us these purports in this 29th chapter of the third canto. Prabhupada also gave us his purports in Ramananda Samvad, describing how these things are lower, this Varnashram Dharma is lower. So we may perform this Varnashram Dharma, again, it's a very subtle thing, with two motivations. We may do it for the pleasure of Srila Prabhupada, so that he's pleased. And that's nirguna bhakti. That's bhakti free from the modes of material nature. But if we do it because I want to enjoy with a wife or a husband, or because I have some personal motivation for myself, if we're pitak bhava, subtly or grossly, then it's saguna bhakti. It's within the modes of material nature. And it's not ultimately what Srila Prabhupada wanted. At the same time, Srila Prabhupada wanted devotees to do it because he saw better than them falling down and giving up bhakti and going away. It's better to practice this bhakti in the mode of goodness, or even in the mode of passion, or even in the mode of ignorance, but to continue practicing bhakti. So I hope that part of your question is clear. And then you ask, is there a Varnashram college in ISKCON? Well, that's an interesting question. I think it would depend on your perspective. Someone might say that all of ISKCON is a Varnashram college. In one sense, I would suggest that, because it's teaching us, Bhaktivinoda Thakur in his commentary on the first verse of Shikshastakam, he says that the consciousness is like a darpana, or a mirror, and when the mirror is really dirty and you're cleaning it, what's the first thing that happens? Maybe you've got some motor oil or something terrible on your mirror, and you're wiping the mirror. At first, you still can't see anything. It's so dirty. But after some time of wiping, you can see a vague form. You can't see color. You can't see much detail, but you see a vague form. That vague form is understanding our position in Varnashram Dharma. And that's the first thing that happens when we start cleansing the mirror of the consciousness. So in that sense, in a higher sense, I would suggest that all of ISKCON is a Varnashram college. And Srila Prabhupada says this, in effect, in some purports. He says the purpose of ISKCON is to establish Varnashram Dharma. He says that. Of course, the purpose of ISKCON is to establish Sudha Bhakti. But a secondary purpose, which is also a purpose, is to establish Varnashram Dharma so that we can come to Sudha Bhakti. Now, more directly in answer to your question without being so tricky, is there a Varnashram college in ISKCON? Right now, there are some places in, where were we at in South India? We were taking treatment down there. Udupi. Near Udupi, there's a Varnashram college there that some devotees have established. It's just beginning. And frankly, going there and visiting it, as we did a few years ago, they have a long ways to go. And they understand that also. The Gurukula here, Krishna Kona is pointing out, the Gurukula here in Mayapur, they have a very nice Varnashram college they're working on. It's a work in progress, because Varnashram is not such an easy thing to understand. Usha has commented, Dandavats Prabhuji, how do we understand impersonal as Christians, etc., with the mode of goodness, qualities like caring and humility, as opposed to the sadhak not having those qualities in spite of taking Harinam and knowing the philosophy? Yes. So someone may be practicing bhakti, and that's in the mode of goodness, but they're adama sattvika bhakta, because they're doing it for themselves. And there's so many different modes of nature mixed with bhakti, as Prabhupada was describing in his purport. Someone may be practicing bhakti, but they may not have these good qualities. Bhaktivinoda Thakur discusses this in his Bhakti Tattva Vivek. And by the way, if she happens to be listening either right now or later on, there was a question recently from Ujjwala Rasa? Yeah. Ujjwala Rasagya Mataji, which is very similar to this, and which we didn't address, but I'll maybe address both these questions at the same time. That how is it that sometimes we see Mayavadis, Buddhists, Christians, other persons, and they have such good qualities. They're really caring and loving. And sometimes the devotees, to use a Bengali or Odia word or Hindi word, they're badmash, they're rascals, they're nonsense. The devotees are really in the mode of ignorance. And they don't give a damn about someone else's feelings or things. How do we understand these two things? Bhaktivinoda in Bhakti Tattva Vivek, he describes different types of bhakti. What is Sudha Bhakti, what is Chaya Bhakti, what is Pratibimba Bhakti, what is Bhakti Abhas. He says broadly there's two categories of Bhakti Abhas, or a reflection, or a indirect bhakti, let's call it that. One is Chaya Bhakti Abhas, and the other is Pratibimba Bhakti Abhas. Chaya Bhakti Abhas is like a shadow. And Pratibimba Bhakti Abhas is like a reflection. Now, of the reflection, you have a tree, and there's a reflection of the tree in the water. And you have a shadow of the tree. Which of the two looks better? The reflection. There's color, there's variegatedness, there's detail within the reflection. But in the shadow, there's no color, There's this vague form, there's no detail like that. So that reflection, although it looks better, Bhaktivinoda says is always and necessarily not as good as the shadow. Why? Because the shadow is connected to the tree, whereas the reflection is not connected. So similarly, sometimes there's some personalities who have good qualities and we give respect to them. They're very caring. They're in the mode of goodness. They're humble. But we see devotees are completely proud sometimes and they don't have these good qualities. So of the two, the one is like Pratibimba Bhakti Abhas. It looks good, but there's no connection with the tree. And so always and necessarily, it's not as good as the shadow, which is connected to the tree, even though the shadow doesn't look as good. And sometimes there are people who have much better qualities than the devotees. And I would strongly suggest that we should give respect to those persons. We should be very humble and see how it's important to develop those qualities for ourselves. I didn't know who Usha was. It's Ujjwala Rasagya Mataji. So we just answered your question the other day on WhatsApp. Thank you very much. Okay, so thank you all very much. Krishna Kun, do you want to make any final comments or anything at the end? All right, thank you very much. And we'll be back again on Wednesday. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Vancha Kalpatarubhishcha, Kripa Sindhu